Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, a political economist warns of the dire consequences of a global flight from marriage.
Same-sex couples may soon be able to conceive their own children through stem cells.
And a college student charged with sexual assault says he was trying to reenact 50 Shades of Grey.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines to deal with very foundational moral issues relating to family, marriage, and life.
Exactly, and those issues tend to revolve around topics including abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Right. So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. And first up today, an article in the Wall Street Journal questions whether global statistics show a flight from family. It warns of the consequences that this shift could have, particularly for the very old and young.
Wow. I think the statistics really just back kind of what you see already. I think it's evident even without the statistics, the numbers, but the numbers really bring new light and kind of put meat on the bones to what seems like is just very prevalent with kind of trends with family. And this article that was in the Wall Street Journal and just I guess, investigations into the family unit and how trends are shaping up is just really, it's kind of scary. It's really scary too how globally affected it is as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think this analysis was just fascinating. So this is Nicholas Eberstadt. He's a political economist and a demographer writing in the Wall Street Journal. And he says all around the world today, pre-existing family patterns are being upended by a revolutionary new force, the seemingly unstoppable quest for convenience by adults demanding ever greater autonomy. And so he's saying that basically out of a desire for convenience, we're no longer living in families. And so, you know, that instead of this assumption that people live in families, it's just one option out of many, and it's an option that many people are rejecting for the sake of convenience because other people are a burden. They have these needs and these desires, and they just kind of get in the way. So let's not do that. Let's just kind of be on our own and, you know, not have a family.
Right. And I mean, that's exactly how I feel people treat the situation too. So I thought that was a good way to put it. Like it's like just acting out of convenience, really. And really, what it boils down to is really selfishness. But I think that kind of how society tells us we should be, it kind of has leaked into the family as well, right? Like we're always like commercials, for instance, will say something something like, you know, you need to be so comfortable in your car, or you need to be, it needs to be very convenient and close. There needs to be, you know, 10 different grocery stores close to you, right? Society and products and just what people expect, I think in general, not just relating to like family, but in general, your life should be convenient. Everything should be convenient about it, including your relationships. And if there is a relationship that requires you to put in any time or effort or take care of somebody that may inconvenience what you want to do, you might want to go watch some TV or go out to the bar with your friends or do something else. It says, oh, that's inconvenient, you don't need it. What really matters is the person, kind of this individualized trend. You know, what matters to you? Doesn't matter what anybody else, just what matters to you.
Right, and so some of the statistics here are just alarming. You know, within the U.S., more than 40% of U.S. babies were born out of wedlock in 2013, according to the CDC. So that's 4 in 10 babies that are not being born and raised by their biological parents. And you know, we've seen that there are a lot of implications that they're not going to have the same shot at financial well-being, at, you know, they have to have a tendency to greater psychological issues, all these different behavioral problems. And so that's pretty alarming. And then 1 in 4 children live in a fatherless home in 2014, according to the census. So that's pretty alarming. In terms of the implications for those people. Those children are at a disadvantage. And then we're seeing this in Europe as well, this divorce, the cohabitation, but also living alone. I thought this one was really interesting. In Western Europe, 1 in 3 households is a one-person unit.
Wow.
So normally people living by themselves, maybe right out of college or something like that.
Yeah.
But 1 in 3 households is a person living alone. So they're not living, they don't have roommates, they don't have a family.
I thought
that was really shocking.
I thought that was really shocking too. It kind of stood out to me, that statistic as well. It's Europe's most rapidly growing family type is one-person households, and it coincides, they say, with the population aging too. And I thought that was really something that I hadn't thought about before, because we're getting this scenario. Also, another trend in Europe is a surge in child-free adults. And so you think about these people, and you think about just the aging population in general, especially like here in the U.S. with the baby boomers. There's a large population getting older, and then just a lot of single people without families attached to them. Maybe their mom and dad are gone and passed away. Or they don't have any children. Basically, there's nobody there to take care of them. So it's also kind of sad, because and all these topics that we talk about are kind of tied together, right? Because then things like euthanasia come into play, right? Where it's like, oh, this poor person, he's just sitting here all alone and he doesn't have any family. Well, now let's just kill him quickly and put him out of his misery. And so it's amazing to me, just when you think of all the things that we talk about, how closely tied together they are. Family and just how we treat the youngest and the oldest, right? Because this affects both people on the spectrum. To make it very convenient for myself by abandoning my family, it really affects the elderly and the young a lot, right? The kids are hurt so bad by this. And I can't help to think, but what kind of example is a person in that scenario setting for that child? They think, well, they see, children, it's amazing. Children just absorb everything that they see and experience. And, they take that in and apply it to their own life. So hopefully I can't help but just to think about that fact too.
Exactly, and that's the big point that Eberstadt's making here, is that if we're basing our life on convenience, then we are not going to be taking care of the old and the young, because we are most inconvenient at those times of our lives. We're needy. We need the care of other people when we're young and old.
Right.
So what are we going to do? Are we prepared to deal with the consequences for humanity of, sort of a rejection of those who are most dependent on us? And, this is a global issue, because it's not just the West, U.S., and Europe. He also explains that in Asia, this is becoming, sort of...
Yeah, in Japan.
In Japan and in other places in Asia, marriage is being delayed or totally skipped. In Japan, almost 1 in 3 women in their mid-40s has no children. So that intentional childlessness. And even in the Arab world, in some Muslim countries, some of the stats for never married women in Libya and Morocco are higher than in the U.S. and parts of Europe. So this is among women who don't have a high income or a high education level. They're still, rejecting marriage and sort of rejecting family. It's very interesting.
And that's what surprised me as well. And they said that a Japanese woman born in 1980 stands less than even odds of getting married and staying married at age 50. I was like, wow, that's pretty incredible. Like less than 50-50 odds of being married and staying married by 50. The stats just shocked me. And I thought it was also very ironic that even though we're in an age now where we're living so much longer, they said, we're living longer, but ironically these family structures aren't allowing us to, we're less capable and perhaps also less willing to provide that care and support than ever before, even in a time when we're living so much longer.
Right, so we have these people living longer. Who's going to take care of them? Especially if they don't have children and they don't have family because they rejected that, then you have all these people who have all these needs, and who's going to fulfill that? So it's definitely an issue that we need to get corrected, because it's going to just perpetuate. Yep,
interesting and sad trends. All right, and our next story. Two-dad families may be a reality after researchers in Cambridge and the Weizmann Institute of Science used stem cell research to create eggs and sperm. So this is really fascinating to me. So we've talked before on the show about stem cells, and that the church isn't against stem cells themselves or stem cell research itself, but against embryonic stem cell research.
Right.
So typically we say adult stem cell research and everything is great because it doesn't destroy a human person. And so that's really the moral issue here, not the science and investigating and kind of tinkering at a microscopic level and all this stuff. So this is an example of a stem cell, an adult stem cell. So basically the gist of it, just to simplify things, is they take a skin cell from one adult male, a skin cell from another adult male. They have a technique where they can reverse it down to this very primitive, like very basic stem cell that can turn into any other cell in the body. And what they're doing is they can take those two stem cells and reverse them all the way back, and then basically fast forward them into an egg and a sperm. So it's basically an egg and a sperm from a male, the way they do it, from both each, and then they, of course, join the sperm and the egg, and then presumably, if everything goes right, then, you know, according to plan, then there is a human being created. So it's just a crazy thought to me. The first thing I thought of when I saw this was, I was like, what? And I just want to know, like, who thinks of these things? How do they think, like, hey, let's just do this and then reverse it? And I don't know. It's just crazy. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I had to check and make sure that this was a real article and it wasn't some kind of science fiction, you know, something like that, because it just seems so absurd. And, you know, as you said, this is an example of adult stem cell research, which is an okay technology. It's not bad in itself, but it's being used for problematic purposes.
Yes.
And so they've only gotten to that stage so far. They haven't actually joined the egg and the sperm, so they don't know if
what
it
will happen or if it'll work.
But that is they've acknowledged that there's some serious ethical questions with that.
Yes.
There's a lot of health concerns, a lot of safety concerns. We don't know
mutations and genetic.
Exactly, the genetic implications. There's a huge lack of data and a lack of knowledge in science, and really it's just an unethical form of human experimentation. You can't treat children as an object to be created in a lab. It's devaluing human life, which is why the church is opposed to it. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the scientific community reacts to this, if they even give the go-ahead to try joining that egg and sperm, because they had them, they could have joined them, and they were like, we're going to stop right here. We're going to, you know, let's take a step back, which I think is good.
Right.
So very interesting.
It is really interesting, and you do wonder what how people react. I think overall, people, when they see this, just based on the comments and stuff and web pages about this story, it seems like most people are like, oh my gosh, don't do this, right? So, but I mean, in this day and age, like, just linking it up with our last story about how people just want what they want, right? And all that matters to them is what they want. That's how we get into this position of treating children like they're just objects that we can create because we want one, right? And so it's just really dangerous. And so this research, by the way, was funded by the Wellcome Trust, and it was published in the journal called Cell, as in like a stem cell, C-E-L-L. And it's just crazy. I want to read a quote from the journal. It says, "We have succeeded in the first and most important step of this process, which is to show we can make these very early human stem cells in a dish." So I just, and that was by Azim Sarani, professor of physiology and reproduction. So it just blows my mind that they were able to do these types of things. But it just sounds like something out of science fiction, doesn't it? And it's amazing that, I mean, just how fast humans progress and that we get into these types of situations. And you would think adult stem cells, oh, they're so good, you know, they can do all these things for us. But then here's an application. For instance, same thing with this study, right? An infertility expert at Sheffield University said that this could help make sperm for men who had survived childhood cancer. So there's all kinds of, it seems like whenever there's a moral conundrum going on, that things that, oh, it could help this are always cited, kind of an ends justifies the means type of thing. Right. And so we always have to be careful about getting into those types of situations as well, right? Infertility is something that is awful and it's difficult to deal with, but we have to remember that, you know, the means that we take to repair it or fix it are also important. Not just the end state.
Coming up after the break, find out how 50 Shades of Grey led to one college student's arrest.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our next story, a college student in Chicago charged with sexually assaulting another student allegedly said that he had been reenacting a scene from 50 Shades of Grey.
Wow. What were your first thoughts?
It was, you know, it was just horrible, absolutely horrific. And then to say, you know, okay, I was just reenacting this book. It's a movie, it's very common, it's great, everybody loves it.
Right.
You know, it's shocking, but maybe it shouldn't be surprising because, you know, this is sort of what we've been glorifying as a culture. Then why is it so surprising when people are incorporating that into their own lives? We actually covered this, we covered 50 Shades of Grey a number of weeks ago. Yes. And I thought it was really interesting that, you know, one of the quotes that we used there, I thought was actually really relevant now. So this is a quote that we had a couple weeks ago. It's from Dr. Gail Dines, who's the founder of an international feminist organization, Stop Porn Culture. And the quote is, "It brands violence as romance. It teaches women that sexual abuse and being a victim is hot or sexy, and it's really the story of a seasoned predator. So that's talking about 50 Shades of Grey, the book and the movie.
Yep.
And I think that's so applicable to this case where you have this 19-year-old student, which interestingly, he was a student leader. So he was a student ambassador.
Right.
He was doing, all these leadership activities at the school.
Right.
And he ends up getting arrested for sexually assaulting and physical violence against a young woman at the college.
Yes.
And then he's saying, oh, well, she agreed to it. And so it really brings up some of these shaky questions of consent, which also are brought up in the book, that if someone says it's okay for you to beat me, for you to inflict harm upon me, for you to be sexually violent against me, does that make it okay? It's raising some interesting questions.
It does raise some interesting questions. And like you said, I think it's shocking but not surprising that something like this happens, right? It's shocking when you read about it and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this type of thing went down. But at the same time, you're like, well, that's kind of a natural tendency of what happens. People see these things, they think, and it's like that with anything. When people get used to seeing things, then it just becomes normal, right? That's kind of how everything goes, that it's any agenda that's trying to be pushed, right? Like same-sex marriage and all these other things, like, hey, this is just the way that it is, right? It's normal. Everybody does it. This is how it is, so let's make it normal. So I think when we watch movies and things like that, too, it just reinforces, maybe even subconsciously, probably subconsciously, that, hey, these things are okay. And then based on the description that I read, it did sound like, at least initially, maybe there was some there was some agreement about what was going to happen, but maybe not all of things. And so I think people, especially maybe this particular guy, saw the movie and thought, oh, well, this is going to be okay. From the movie, it seemed like she was enjoying things, blah, 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 so I'm going to try it out, right? But at the same time, it's like, listen, if you're this really smart dude and you're the leader of all of these organizations, it seems like you would be able to have some common sense about these things. But I think that's one of the dangers, is that people maybe lose some sort of common sense and don't, because things are so prevalent like this, that they think, oh, well, it's okay, it's all right, nothing bad's going to happen. Apparently he had his jaw dropped to the floor as he was taken. I guess he was convicted and
or they set his bail.
They set his bail, that's right. This is bailed like $500,000 or something like that, or some ridiculous, a large amount of money. And he was just shocked, basically. And I think that people don't really understand the consequences of putting things into practice that they've seen in movies, like 50 Shades of Grey.
What you mentioned about sort of normalizing this as a culture, I think is particularly important, because we're talking about a book that has sold over 100 million copies worldwide.
Right.
So that's 100 million people who are reading about sexual abuse in a romanticized way. So how is that influencing people subconsciously? And it's not that, okay, then the next day everybody's going to go out and do these, commit horrible sexual crimes, but is it one of those things where it's very quietly, slowly getting them accustomed to it, just one little step at a time.
Right.
We see this all over the culture, though, with pornography. There was a study in GQ that was saying, talked about the number of men who found that over time with viewing pornography, their tastes became more extreme or deviant.
Right.
And so there's a lot of pornography out there in the pornography world that is very violent. And there's there's discussions that lawmakers are having about, like, is this a problem? Is this is this objectifying women? And the truth is that all porn is objectifying women, and that all porn, whether it's in the form of a book or a movie or a video or a picture or anything, it's objectifying a human person. And so that's sort of at the heart of it. We're looking at human dignity, no matter what form this is taking. It really is objectifying the person.
Yes.
And that's why we have to speak out against it, and that's why we have to convey that even if this is popular, it doesn't matter how many copies it's sold.
Right.
This is really degrading to humanity. Also,
another thing we have to think about is that sexual intimacy, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just this type of sexual intimacy is abusive, and it's not right, basically. It's not true love, and it's not showing respect for the human person and respect for each other. So,
coming up after the break, we'll have one more story.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. For our final story, the Supreme Court is expected to make a decision this summer regarding the right to same-sex marriage, which raises the obvious question for the Catholic Church: what do we do now? So that question, what do we do now, of course, is intended if they go through with this law, which seems likely that there will be a right to same-sex marriage sometime in the future. So if that does happen, what do we do now, right? Do we just kind of roll over and give up, or or what do we do? And one person, Russell Shaw, he is the author or co-author of 21 books and numerous articles, columns, and reviews. And he's also a member of the faculty of the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome. He's got a lot of He's got a lot of merits. He said there's two steps. He thinks there's a couple of things that we can do. Right? There's an alternative to just giving up and giving in. And so I guess let's talk about the first thing he said. So the first thing he said was let's press for strong legal protections for individuals and institutions. So what did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And he mentioned what should be kind of an alarming point coming out of the Washington Post, an editorial that actually says, well, redefining marriage is just the beginning of what we're actually trying to do. And so this isn't just about getting these civil rights and these recognitions of this union.
Even though it comes off as that. It's
exactly. But this is openly admitting in the Washington Post, actually we want all these other things. And so what Russell Shaw is saying, okay, we need to act now to try to secure our religious freedom, because we've already seen all these instances, the photographers, the cake bakers, the reception hall owners who are already being told you have to violate your conscience in this way. There's a cake baker who's saying, okay, we were being fined $150,000 because you said you couldn't make a cake for this particular ceremony.
Right.
I think that's so important that our religion is seen as an obstacle to the cultural change that they're pushing for. And so they're going to come after that, and they already are. And I think that working for strong legal protections, working to in the public square to try to dialogue and make those points understood is very, very critical.
I think so too. I think preemptively making laws and putting legal protections in place is key. It's huge, right? Because once you get to the ground where it's kind of on the forefront, right? It's the primary issue. Then I think it's a lot more difficult. But while you have people saying, "Oh, this is just what we want," and not all these, they don't mention these other things, then I think it's a better time to start putting in those protections ahead of time, right? Just kind of heading off at the pass, just to make sure, right? I think that if marriage, 80 years ago or whatever, was defined as between one man and one woman, right? Legalizing same-sex marriage today would be much more difficult, right? Because you'd have to be, overturning a previous law or something like that. So I think it kind of puts an extra step in the process of if laws are going to be watered down and broken down and changed, not in favor of Catholic and Christian teachings, I think that's a really good step. So I liked that first step that he had to say.
Yeah,
I thought it made a lot of sense. And then so on the second step, he said that, and you've kind of already talked about it a little bit with the Oregon cake scenario with the fine for $150,000. He said, should the church quit serving as the government's agent in legitimating marriages, right? So what were your thoughts on that?
That's very interesting. I've heard people on both sides of this issue, and basically the argument in favor is saying that we should separate. Right now, people are very confused between civil marriage and sacramental marriage. They don't see a difference.
Yes.
Let's make them clearly separated, which a lot of other countries actually do this. You go to the courthouse for your civil marriage, and then you go to the church for your sacramental marriage.
Right.
And in that case, the church would just say, look, we're totally separate. We've got this matrimony. It's a sacrament. It's totally different. And then the civil marriage becomes something totally separate.
Exactly.
And so let's not have our ministers, our priests, sign the marriage papers from the government. Let's not act as, let's just keep them totally separate. The argument against it is basically saying, well, we really need a strong witness to marriage, and marriage we're already seeing, I think there's a Pew study last year that found that fewer Americans ages 25 and up are married currently than ever before.
Right.
And so we're already seeing fewer people getting married. We need to promote marriage in the public square. We need to promote a strong definition of marriage for civil society, that actually does matter, and we need to keep them united.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people that hear your argument would also say, well, it's already so far gone, and how are we going to put those laws in place? So I see that side of things too. But I think you're right. Either way, it does provide an opportune moment to catechize and correct and clarify like what marriage is all about. And I think that's one of there's just so much confusion about marriage and what it is or what it isn't, because there's so many conflicting viewpoints and bad catechesis and bad examples of people that should be good examples of what marriage is aren't, and so I think that it causes a lot of confusion, and so it is a point, I guess, that this could be a good opportunity, although obviously not in the best circumstances, but it is an opportunity to reteach and kind of re-show and re-strengthen, kind of regroup in a way. So
yeah, I think that's really key, because what we're looking at with the court is we're looking at just a handful of individuals who are going to tell the country whether or not this is a fundamental right.
Right.
And this is something that's never been seen as a right before by any all of humanity.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're left with a panel of people sitting on this bench who are going to be able to say this is a right or this is not a right. So to have these people defining what our rights are shows it's just a very different view than the view that our rights are something that is foundational to our person and something that comes from God.
Absolutely. And tying it into the first point, we do have to be really careful that I think the scenario that people are most afraid of is that if these things become legalized, then the state or the federal government is going to force churches to conduct same-sex marriages or things like that. So that's kind of where the second point comes in, with separating things and making a clear stand after this if this is passed. Because then it's like, okay, they're two different things. They're clearly two different things, and we're not going to participate in registering marriages for the state, as a church or anything like that. It's going to be two different things, because what you believe and have just passed a law about is not what we believe marriage to be, and so we can't participate in that, right?
Right.
So really interesting times. Hopefully things go well for the Christian life.
We'll keep an eye on that this summer.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you. Please
feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.